Amara had lived in Riverbend for almost 8 years, but it was only after her husband died that she learned how loud silence could be. When Michael, her husband, was alive, the small town felt warm and familiar, full of neighbors who stopped by to share fruits from their farms or chat at the small market square. People greeted her by name. They asked about her sewing business. Some even brought fabric for her to mend. But grief changes the air around a person. It settles, invisible but heavy. And in Riverbend, people feared anything they could not explain. The day Michael died was a stormy one. He had gone out to buy medicine for Tomi, their 10-year-old son, who was burning with fever. On his way back, the bus he boarded collided with a truck. Amara remembered how the rain pounded her roof that night, as if the sky itself were grieving. She remembered holding her son, whispering that everything would be all right, though her voice shook. And she remembered the way Riverbend's market women exchanged glances at the funeral, not of sympathy, but of suspicion. Some tragedies attract pity, others invite fear, and hers had invited both at once. After the funeral, life did not simply return to normal. The neighbors stopped knocking on her door. Conversations halted when she approached. She would walk past the row of little houses along Maple Street and feel eyes on her back, measuring her, questioning her, pushing her outside the world she once belonged to. At first, she tried not to notice. She focused on Tomi. She reminded herself that as long as she could wake each morning and make a pot of porridge, as long as she could stitch clothes for customers, as long as her son could sleep peacefully beside her, she would endure anything. But gossip is a slow poison. It enters through the ear and settles in the bones. Some neighbors whispered that Amara had brought the tragedy on herself, that perhaps she had angered someone spiritually. Others said her husband's family had cursed her. Some even claimed she had always been unlucky and that her sorrow could spread to anyone too close. Still others, mostly women, looked at her with distrust for a different reason. A young widow was a dangerous thing. She was too pretty, they said. She would steal husbands, they warned. Amara knew these whispers. She heard them while walking through the market. She felt them when her door stayed unknocked for weeks. She saw them when Tomi walked home from school. But the hardest part was watching it affect Tomi. One afternoon, Tomi returned from school with dirt on his shirt and tears welling in his large brown eyes. "Mama," he whispered, "why do they call you cursed?" Her hands froze on the fabric she had been stitching. She looked up slowly, her heart tightening. "Who said that to you?" "The boys in class. They said that's why Papa died. They said we bring bad luck." For a moment, Amara could not breathe. The needle slipped from her hand. She wanted to cry, to rage, to demand why life had chosen to bruise her again and again. But she did not. She knelt before her son, wiped the dirt from his cheek, and held his tiny hands in hers. "Listen to me, Tomi," she said, her voice firm yet soft. "We are not cursed. We are just hurting. Some people do not understand others' pain, so they talk to make themselves feel safe. But you and I," she tapped his chest gently, "we know the truth of our hearts, and that matters more." Tomi nodded, but his eyes still dimmed with confusion. Amara hugged him tightly. But deep inside, something cracked a little more. Mrs. Adeola lived directly across the street. She was known for her gold jewelry, stiff headscarves, and the wide veranda she often sat on, like a queen surveying her territory. She had once been polite to Amara, not friendly, but civil. However, after Michael died, she became one of the loudest voices of suspicion. Amara had more than once heard her laugh with other women, saying, "A young widow should know her place. Too much beauty is a problem. You'll see, she will start looking at people's husbands soon." It was always loud enough for Amara to hear. always when she passed by with groceries, always when Tomi walked home from school. People believed what they heard often enough. Still, Amara never responded. She learned silence as a shield. There was one neighbor who greeted her every time, though, Mr. Benson, the carpenter who lived 2 houses away. He was a quiet man with kind eyes and hands rough from years of shaping wood. He would simply nod and say, "Good morning, Amara." Not loudly, not in ceremony, just gently, as if reminding her she still existed. Sometimes, that small greeting was enough to carry her through the day. Life continued like this for 2 years. Small cuts of disrespect. Small wounds that healed slowly and reopened just as slowly. But time was weaving something unseen. Life was preparing a turning point Riverbend would never forget. Because the day would come when the same town that shunned her would owe her everything. The sun rose over Riverbend with a quiet gold that seemed almost mocking to Amara. Another day, another wave of stares, whispers, and deliberate distance. Maple Street was alive with life. Children chasing after stray dogs, merchants calling out prices of fresh vegetables, and women gossiping on porches. Yet, Amara felt the invisible walls separating her from everyone. She walked past the familiar houses, holding Tommy's small hand, and forced a smile whenever someone glanced her way. But the smiles were never returned. Even greetings were ignored. Mrs. Adela's house glimmered in the morning light, the curtains fluttering as though the woman herself were peeking to see what Amara would do today. Amara avoided looking up, knowing full well what would follow if she did. The whispers were never just whispers. They were loaded with venom. She shouldn't be allowed here. She will steal someone's happiness soon. Poor boy, he's going to grow up cursed too. Tomi tugged at her sleeve, shivering slightly despite the sun's warmth. "Mama, why does everyone hate us?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Amara stopped walking and knelt in front of him, brushing a strand of hair from his forehead. She forced calm into her voice, though her heart ached. "Tomi, some people are afraid of what they don't understand, and sometimes fear makes them cruel." He looked up at her, eyes wide and searching. "But why, Mama? Why did Papa leave us?" Her throat tightened. She had no answer for why the world seemed so harsh, no way to explain why the same people who once smiled at her had become strangers, filled with suspicion. She held him a little closer. "Papa is still with us, in our hearts, Tomi, and we will carry him with love, not hate." Tomi nodded slowly, clutching her hand, his small fingers trembling. At the market, the whispers followed her like shadows. Vendors who once called out cheerfully now muttered under their breath or glanced away. Even children pointed at her and giggled. Each sound was a pinprick, each look a reminder that she had become a stranger in the town she had once called home. Yet, Amara did not retaliate. She had learned that anger could only make the walls grow higher, the gossip more persistent. Instead, she focused on her work, mending clothes, stitching fabric, and selling the finished garments to the few loyal customers who still came. It was a meager life, but it was hers. The only relief came in small, quiet moments. When Tomi laughed as he played with a stray dog, when Mr. Benson nodded to her as she walked by, when the sun hit her window in the morning just right. These tiny comforts kept her grounded. But Riverbend had a way of testing endurance, and today, it seemed determined to push her further. It began with a note left tucked under her door. Neatly written, in a handwriting she recognized immediately, Mrs. Adela's. "Stay away from our families. Your presence brings bad luck. Keep your son in line. Don't bring shame upon the street." Amara held the note for a long moment, staring at the sharp letters. Her hands trembled, but not with fear, Anger had no room in her heart, only a heavy, cold awareness that she was truly alone in the eyes of her neighbors. Tomi peeked around her, his small eyes wide. "Mama, they hate us." "Yes," she said quietly. "But hatred can only reach as far as we let it. We will live with dignity, Tomi, no matter what they say." Her resolve hardened like the iron in a blacksmith's forge. She would not let gossip define her. She would not let fear guide her son's life. And she would not be broken, no matter how heavy the whispers became. Then came the fire. Flames consumed Mrs. Adela's house with frightening speed. Neighbors screamed and ran, trying to salvage what they could. Amidst the chaos, cries of children echoed from inside the burning home. Amara didn't hesitate. She grabbed a wet blanket, pulled Tomi close, and ran toward the flames while others retreated. She found Mrs. Adela's 2 grandchildren, terrified and clinging to each other. She wrapped them in her arms, covering their faces with the wet blanket, and carried them outside just as the roof collapsed with a deafening crash. Neighbors watched in stunned silence. The same people who had whispered about her, avoided her, and hated her, now saw her risking everything to save their children. The morning after the fire, Riverbend seemed different. The sun rose over Maple Street, but it was not just sunlight that illuminated the houses, it was awareness. Whispered rumors had nothing to cling to now. The town had seen Amara in her truest form. Courage was not a word they had often associated with her, but they could no longer deny it. Mrs. Adela was the first to approach. She had always been poised, commanding respect, but now her steps were hesitant, uncertain. Her voice shook as she spoke. "Amara, I don't know what to say." Amara looked up, calm but firm. "There's nothing to say. The children are safe, and that is all that matters." Mrs. Adela's eyes filled with tears. "I was wronged about you. About everything. I judged you without knowing your heart. I am so sorry." Amara nodded, accepting the apology without bitterness. She had no room in her heart for revenge, only for peace. Tomi, standing beside her, looked up at the woman who had once tormented him with her words and gestures. His small voice was soft but clear. "You should be nicer, Mrs. Adela," he said. The older woman's lips trembled, and she looked down ashamed. The rest of the town followed. Slowly, hesitantly, they began to approach Amara. Some apologized for small slights, others for years of whispered hatred. Words like, "We were wrong," and "forgive us" filled the air. Children who had bullied Tomi now clung to his hand, seeking his forgiveness. Amara listened, nodded, and offered gentle words in return. She did not gloat, did not remind anyone of the harm they had caused. She simply accepted their change of heart and let her actions speak louder than words ever could. Even the pastor, Pastor Dammy, who had often looked on silently, stepped forward. "Amara," he said, voice deep with emotion, "you have shown us all the meaning of courage, of compassion. You have reminded this town of its humanity." Amara lowered her eyes, feeling a quiet warmth rise within her. She had done nothing for recognition. She had acted because it was right. Yet, seeing the town awaken to their own errors, she allowed herself a small, rare smile. Riverbend had disrespected her. They had whispered, avoided, and scorned her. But one act of bravery had changed everything. And in that small town, the story of the widow who risked her life for her neighbors would be told for generations, not as a tale of sorrow, but as a tale of courage, redemption, and the enduring power of a good heart.